Hello everyone, I'm just about ready to get started. I see Calvisham has rated me while I was stepping away. Thank you for resubscribing. 9 months, that's quite a long time. I'm gonna save the shoutouts for the new people that followed, I think for a different video though. I want to get right into the purpose of today's stream. So as you can probably tell by the stream title, or for people on the VOD looking at the YouTube title, I think I'm done with Suikoden Tactics. I feel like this is an ironic song choice, I want you to know. It just played to the song. The song, of course, being, I think it's called Things Lost, right? Things Lost, yes. So, I'm kind of at the point of the playthrough where I don't think I'm having fun with the game. So, I want to walk through, from the beginning, impressions of the game and why it just didn't work for me. And why I'm not interested in continuing. So, the beginning of the game, you know, you're treated with the animated cutscene movie. Didn't really care for the opening song. I mean, I've seen mixed things. Some people like it, some people, you know, feel average about it. And one of the things it introduces is one of the many things that I feel like detract from the game pretty heavily. The graphics. The graphics are not good, chat. They are, I would say, like, I think I described it to somebody else as, like, PlayStation 1.5 graphics. Like, it's not something befitting a higher power console like PS2. It reminds me of stuff that you would see on, like, a PSP. But even then, I feel like PSP games were cleaner. I don't want to be besmirching the PSP name. But the character models are not good. I mean, just to give context for the game, let's get our details all in order before I continue on this tangent. But this game is not an early PlayStation 2 game, unfortunately. It's been, you know, it's been out for a little bit. It came out in November 8th, 2005. I want to compare it against one other game that I'm going to be talking about, I think, for a lot of the comparisons of why this particular game did not work for me, but other games did. I'm going to compare the release dates. I'm really curious. Okay, so one game I'm going to be bringing up, and I apologize for people that have not played the game before, but it is the first in the Disgaea series. I believe it was called Hour of Darkness. It came out in 2003 originally, January 2003. So I'm shaping my expectations for strategy-based RPGs to, you know, we're in the era of experimentation. We're in the era of, they haven't quite nailed down the PS2 version of things, but they have had years, I'm telling you, years of building up these kinds of games. This is not brand new on the system. Nobody's ever done a strategy RPG before. So when I'm introduced to the game, and I'm coming off of it from having played Suikoden 4, I'm curious where the story may or may not go. We're introduced to these blocky fist people. It reminds me of like a very small quality upgrade over the original Final Fantasy VII. I'm calling them out. They were all like Play-Doh people. they had no fingers. They were amorphous block hands. And it reminds me of that. So already I'm kind of concerned, but I'm like, okay, graphics don't make the game, right? If the gameplay is really good or the story is really good, you can ignore some issues like this, which I do see it as a detractor in this particular instance. I think some of the drawn portraits are solid, with the exception of the townspeople that they made eyeless for some reason, which is just really creepy. I don't know why they went with that decision. Why didn't they draw eyes on the townspeople, chat? I would love an honest art direction answer why none of the townspeople had eyes. They just had like skin-shaped shadows where eyes should be. It was very strange from an artistic choice. But we're immediately greeted with what I would consider the problem. So this is not a new genre. When you want to get new people into these games, you have to do one of two things. You either approach it and give something so brand new and out there that nothing else is like it, and that itself is the compelling gameplay. This is not that kind of game. So what does it need to do to pull people into it? Well, Instead of going in a 6-party format like Suikoden 4 did, which is, again, the game we came off of in the Suikoden series and is a direct prequel to this game, it is a isometric view with very sluggish camera maneuvering. It's very sluggish. And it's grid-based combat. There are little, I guess you could say, spice to make the game a bit more interesting was the concept of elemental tiles, where if people are familiar with things like weapon triangles and things like that, just picture if you're on an element matching your character, you do more damage, you take less damage. If an enemy is on it, or if you're on something that you're weak against, like let's say, concepts of like fire and ice, earth and wind, blah, 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 then you take damage every turn. So that's going to be big issue number 1 for me. But you also take more damage and you deal less damage. So terrain is suddenly extremely crucial. And the way it just kind of plays with it. Oh, thank you, Chaosvania. It informed me of a watch streak. I don't know why that's a feature. So the way they tried to do it, and where I feel it really, really dropped the ball to pull me as a new player into its mechanics, is conveying what abilities actually do. Like, that just seems like such a weird statement to make, but it's really true. Like, compare just how the standard RPG Suikoden handles, which is doing achievements, yeah. Just compare how it does that in other Suikoden games. If I want to see what spells do, and I have a rune equipped, I go to the rune menu and hover the spell. Simple, straightforward, makes sense. You go to the thing that's named after the thing you're looking for. This game, you equip a rune. How do you check what the spells do? I don't know, guess I have to go to combat because I don't know where that is in the menus. There is no rune menu anymore, they got rid of it. And that's the problem with a lot of these menu choices. They made it like halfway, or not even halfway, they made it a hybrid of like the strategy turn-based menus of moving between towns, changing your party, etc., etc. And they're still trying to keep in some of the concepts of how you equip the characters from the Suikoden games. And man, it just led to such a messy party management system. I did not like it at all. I was trying to liken to why specifically it annoyed me as early as literally the starting battle. Like, we haven't even talked about the gameplay in detail or any of the tutorials or any of the story. But just immediately, I'm annoyed by the menus. Just immediately, chat. So I'm like trying to figure out where things are because like some of them, are intuitive. And I'm like, okay, I can figure out what this does. And, I'm familiar with facing. When you stop your turn, you look at different directions. I don't need the game to explain things like this. But when you fight a monster and it randomly can just do a cleave attack that hits multiple tiles or has a ranged projectile, it damn well better tell you it can do those things. Because I'm going to let you know, chat, I find that very annoying. I'm going to compare it to other games briefly. Again, apologies for the long-windedness of this portion. When you want to figure out about monster abilities, or you want to see what ranges characters have, it is extremely common in these games, like so incredibly common, to just highlight the unit. What does that show you? The movement space. Suikoden Tactic does that. However, what this game doesn't tell you is how much reach do they actually have. So it's missing the attack portion. And top that off with no ability to see what the runes do. So if an enemy has a 3rd level slot or a 2nd level slot of magic, what can they do? I don't know. I can't look it up mid-battle. I have to either have it and have used it and seen it, or I just have to know that apparently things like innate monster abilities are not worth describing anywhere on the character. I guess I'm expecting too much coming from a game like Final Fantasy Tactics, where it tells you their main class skill, secondary class skill, reactions, support techniques, movements, and it laid it out on a single screen, and everything I ever wanted to know, including potentially figuring out weaknesses, is all on one screen, and this game cannot deliver it. And to me, that is bonkers. Like, we're talking about like a PS1 game. This is like a almost genre-defining game, has already established this. like many years ago by this point, like more than 4. So I'm just kind of sitting there baffled, where it's like, I feel like when I get into scenarios with the enemies and then like suddenly they just have an attack that does like 80 something damage, and I'm like, well, gee, that would have been nice to know. That would have been nice to know he's just got like a nuke button. Thanks, I guess, for not conveying that exactly. Like, unless you have the rune and you've seen it before, a lot of the battles just feel like kind of annoying gotcha moments. Like, it's like a great example is when we left the tutorials, and the first place we went is the mines. Chat probably remembers this. I go literally halfway into the map, and then it's like, gotcha! You gotta deal with 7 ambush units with your one level 1 character you've been trying to level that apparently can permadie. Gotcha! Isn't that a fun strategy gimmick? Don't you love it when the game just almost adds 50% of more enemies by just an arbitrary tile movement? What great game design. I say with deep sarcasm. So it's like, I'm already annoyed in the tutorial. Like, I barely left the tutorial. I'm annoyed by the menu. I'm annoyed by literally the first story battle outside of the flashback episodes. And I'm like, man, this is not off to a good start. So it's like, let's talk about the story with the compelling reasons. I didn't feel pulled in by the whole universe of the game. So like, what was I hoping this game would be about? Well, I like that it's set in the same setting. I like that it involves some of the previous characters, some of the new characters. But unfortunately, I think it's leaning upon what I thought was one of the dumbest plot points of Suikoden 4, which is the rune cannons. I literally was like, I even commented in our Suikoden 4 playthrough that, like, had I not read the manual, there was like not even like 4 text boxes total talking about the rune cannons, and like none of them talked about people getting turned into monsters or any kind of weird stuff that happens in this game. So it feels just kind of weird to focus on something that is literally concluded as of the 4th game. Like, you defeat the thing that makes the rune cannons. So I'm already like, well, the problem's gonna solve itself according to the game. So I'm already like less interested. There's no mystery. Like, I solved this already in Suikoden 4. They're like, oh no, the rune cannons are disappearing, and I'm like, good? Okay. Right? I'm like, yeah, the previous hero solved this problem. Question mark. I don't know what we're still doing with this, but sure. And yeah, it just was like, I don't know. I just wasn't compelled by like the hero. Like, you know, it's just one of those typical things where a family figure dies and you're motivated to do battle. I mean, this is like a tale as old as time. It's like Protagonist with Amnesia. It's like a couple steps removed, maybe a bit more complicated, but not as compelling for me, honestly. It's just one of those things. They were like one step away from, and then the hero's town burned down. Like, they were pretty close to that territory, chat. They didn't quite go there to the point of the game that I played. Maybe later on it did. Apparently there were 22 chapters, story chapters of the game. We stopped somewhere around chapter 9. I think going into chapter 10. Where I just kind of had enough of the game. So I'm just sitting here and I'm going through. So this is the experience so far. Not a fan of the graphics. The characters, I'm not really compelled by the protagonist. I don't really care about the rune cannons. I was more interested in interacting with the other empire, which it started to get into around literally almost the halfway point in the game, which again is a weird statement to say. It gets better halfway in. Like, again, like it should be more interesting before that point. But from the standpoint of things like the gameplay, almost as soon as we left the tutorial, coming into things like the mine battles again, going through the optional battles, one thing that just really, really rubs me the wrong way, and it's not specifically this game's fault, it happens in every game that does this. I do not like games that rank you. I do not like games that give you items based off the ranking. I really do not like that. I don't like it as a concept. I don't like it that not only does it rank you and do these things, it doesn't really break down in a score, even just in a loose sense. how to get a better ranking, quote unquote. So I'll give an example. If you're going to compare it to other strategy games like Advance Wars, there's like a power, a technique, and a speed. So I can see, based off of their expectations, oh, I didn't kill enough units, or oh, too many of my units died, or oh, I wasn't fast enough. And it gives you that courtesy to let you know how far off at least you were from their expectations. This game's like, oh, you beat it without any characters dying, and you took like maybe one extra turn. Yeah, I'm gonna give you B rank. And then the other one, oh, you let like 2 characters of yours die, and you barely beat the boss, A rank. Like, I'm throwing my hands in the air. I'm like, okay, I don't get it, but sure. So I'm already annoyed. I'm sitting there, and then I got a glimpse of the items I could have attained had I retried on some of these really nonsense gotcha moments in the battles in order to get a better score. And they are enough that I feel it actually just tilts it completely in your favor. So this is kind of like the feast or famine style of gameplay, and I am not a fan of it. It immediately puts me on like the defensive. I stop enjoying the game almost immediately when I identify these kinds of things, and I found it very annoying. So like, I'll give an example. I believe the worst accessory we could have gotten was like a bronze medal, which gave 1 defense. We got like we didn't even get to S rank. I have even seen what some of those are. Just the A rank was over 4 times more powerful. I believe it had 4 defense comparatively. And in a game where potentially ranking is based off of how much damage you take, that is some big BS. I'm just letting you know, chat, that if you just don't get the early ranks, it just like, it gets further and further out of reach. I really don't like that style of gameplay. So couple all of these things together, and we are basically going through the story mode. I'm not feeling compelled by these characters. The voice acting is okay. I saw some people saying that, you know, it was kind of stilted. It kind of reminds me of like, I mean, some of them are literally like what would be 4Kids or generic anime voice over dub people. I mean, they are very iconic for who they are. Their voices, I just identify with their other shows. I'm not personally bothered by it, but I'm not really compelled by it either, kinds of things. It's fine. I wasn't really sold on their performances, but I didn't really get to a point where too much crazy had happened. I think an unironically really funny plot point was they left, what was his name? Iscus in the cave all by himself to die, presumably. I'm sure he comes back. I'm sure he plays a bigger role. I wouldn't be surprised if you told me he's supposed to be a villain, because why else would he be asking about rune cannons? But it's just one of those things where, like, I was laughing at the game as opposed to with the game. So I'm already not on the game's side. The ranking has me against it on every single battle we go through. And so, like, if I don't like the combat mechanics, from the stupid gotcha moments to ridiculous damage swaps with the terrain, like, to give a more concrete example, I could go from dealing 60 damage to a 50 health character to only dealing 10 damage. And all that really takes is going from a strong terrain to a weak terrain. The damage that potentially can be dealt to you is absolutely bonkers. And that's where it gets a little frustrating, because there's just a lot of different ways the enemies can manipulate the squares beneath you, which is like cool in a sense, but also extremely irritating when you're setting up and you're like, oh, I'm gonna check all the damages by walking up and attacking and see how much they can counterattack me for on a tile similar to mine, which is hard to set up because you can only put the tiles in certain locations, so it's very hard to get an accurate estimate of how much damage you'll take at any given time based off their stats. So when you do all this, the game is like, oh, gotcha, and then it just like, oh, we could just use more of our terrain shifter, and we just destroyed you. Granted, I didn't reset like a lot. I think the only time I really reset, honestly, was the caves, and I think the treasure hunt mission. But it wasn't a good feeling going through the story mode. Like, I never felt like, wow, I conquered it. It was more like, wow, that was nonsense. But like every single mission was like that. I think the only time I wasn't annoyed at the battles was the free dungeon, because the free dungeon didn't spawn ambush units. I kid you not, of like the almost 10 story chapters we played and 1 or 2 optional battles, we had six ambush chapters. Six, chat. Why were there so many? And then like it commits like to me what is one of the cardinal sins too of that style game, of a kind of unforgiving amounts of damage. You have to be able to just expect the unexpected randomly all the time, which I do not find enjoyable or really entertaining from a strategy standpoint. Is that it has the gall, it has the absolute nerve to do that on a battle that's an escort mission, where if the escort dies, you game over. And guess what? Every single enemy can kill that character in one hit. What great mechanics that randomly stepping onto the map will spawn 3 or more enemies that get a turn potentially before you and kill the escort. Round of applause, you failed. Don't do this. Hello, Moxie, be a good children's book narrator. Thank you for that. So it's just like, it's just one of those things. Like, I think I've said this phrase in a couple other final thoughts where I got a bit more heated, where it's like, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And I feel like this game had a big issue with that. So I don't feel like it really respected me in terms of a player with the ranking system based off of things it doesn't want to reveal to you, challenging you with things you've never seen before, not revealing monster mechanics that are actually game-changing in a turn-based game. To know what the ranges are is very vital to a strategy game to understand how far things can hit. Like, these are just very basic things that I feel like it really, really flubbed it. So I'm just kind of like thinking of a parallel, and I mentioned before Disgaea. That is a game that is so much more complicated than this one, and it was so much better at conveying information, and it had a better art style, and it let you skip through animations. Oh, I actually skipped that part. So one annoying thing too with this game is that while it does have voice lines for nearly everything in the game, if you restart at all, you have to sit through the full vocal line of dialogue. I don't know why. Why can't you skip the dialogue when they're speaking? Why is this a thing? They did this in Suikoden 4 where you couldn't skip cutscenes as well. So this one is after that one because it's a sequel to that one. So I see they chose not to learn between games. Nothing has changed. So you're potentially faced with, like, if you do happen to restart, upwards of like 2 minutes of dialogue that isn't like really all that interesting between battles. So even just like going in for rankings is going back to the word that I don't like to use, but it is true. It's tedious. It feels very tedious to retry, and this is a game that wants to bait you into retrying to do quote unquote better according to their own metrics. And it's like, while I've cleared the story mode and we did not end on like a stalemate or anything, it's not like I wasn't able to beat a battle and we gave up. It's just very annoying to me and very tedious. I want to give an example of something of things that are not fair to the player. In particular, if this is literally the first time in the entire game you're doing this and you're testing it in battle. So they introduced a rune on one of the optional recruit characters called the Firefly rune, which has been in the Suikoden series since forever. Right? The intent of it is that it draws attacks towards them, aka like the things are going towards the shiny light. And we witnessed it fail, I think twice. Not quite in a row, but it failed to do its purpose of luring attacks away. And when you see like where, if you happen to go back into the playthrough, if not, I'll describe it briefly. But when we went to use it on a boss that was on mounts being the first time, again, we've seen this feature. It is not really described. We have to just kind of guess how much movement they have. We got to watch this character with the Firefly rune go in front of everybody else by like a very large distance. We're talking of more than 4 tiles. And instead the boss navigated, I think 9 or 10 total tiles around that character to go fight the mage in the back row. And they just happened to be on the right elemental tile and almost one-shot my mage. Had I not used that mage in another optional battle, and had I brought them in as soon as I had recruited them, that character would have died. I don't really find that fun. I don't really find that fair. I don't really enjoy that kind of gameplay. And again, it's like, it was getting a little better with how many units you could deploy. Early on, you start with, I think, 5. Sometimes it goes down to 3 because you get story characters. We got as high as, I think, 8 recruits in one battle. But man, it's just like a lot of information to take in. And the fact that it's not willing to really hold your hand in certain portions that are unique to the game, then it just makes it more trouble than it's worth. So I'll give a counterpoint example from Disgaea, where I feel like this is very relevant, and I feel like I want to play Disgaea specifically because of this game, to say, like, I'm reminded a lot of how this was done better in other games. So, like, in a game like Disgaea, they have a lot of puzzles, which is a bit, I would say, unusual for a strategy-based RPG. And the way they do it is very similar to this game. You have colored floor tiles. However, at any point, you could see the effects of the tiles as soon as you have like a pause menu. And you could very easily check everything out. You could very easily skip through all the characters. This game also had a little bit to an extent where you could see the turn order, skip to the right characters. But just the way that it was able to convey that information on just a few simple screens just shows like how lacking it is when I can't tell like how far an enemy spell will reach or what it does or what they have. Compare that to like a Disgaea where I could see like, oh, I could see all their equipment, which you could sort of do in Suikoden Tactics, but again, you're not really sure the stats each individual item applies, etc., etc. So this one will go as far as the breakdown of their class, their range, their attacks. You could look at their spells. You can look at the spell description. You see little UI things for their spells. You can highlight a spell in order to see how far they can hit while moving. So you can figure out their entire kit without having ever seen the character, without having ever played the character. And you're able to make proper decisions because it's a strategy game. It's supposed to be a strategy game. I want to remind people this. So not being able to play, quote-unquote, to the supposed S-rank ability because the game just doesn't want to teach you certain things that are actually necessary, I find just kind of annoying. And again, the fact that it all ties into a ranking system, the fact that getting punished like that mage taking 90% of her health despite being at full health and on a tile that she was on strong defense with, still almost died instantly, by the way. It's just like, it just makes me question like why. I don't really want to continue that kind of game. I thought I would get a little further in terms of seeing our character one more time, Boydana from 4, but I saw we needed to do 2 more story battles and then yet another battle to unlock the character. I was not feeling up to it at that point. The goodwill was burned out, I think, on that Firefly encounter. Watching that boss just literally perfectly manage its way all the way through the field to get to the mage. So far away. Just ridiculous. So, my God, what other things have I not really covered about the game in terms of combat? I'm just thinking about it. I guess I could talk about briefly some of the positives. You could assign skills to the characters. It did add a little bit of strategy to figuring out who was inherently good at blocking or magic using, etc. I really didn't like that I had one mage for the first 8 chapters. Chat has seen how I played this game. I play with almost all mages. In fact, Suikoden 1 was literally oops all mages. I think we didn't play with a single melee character at several points in that game because spells were really good. So coming off of that kind of playstyle where magic is very lackluster, I think the best way to put it is it's very support-esque. But when I want to pick something like fire and lightning, I'm not looking here to support people, chat. I'm here to just nuke them out of existence. So missing that kind of role and being forced to play with a very mediocre mage whose best trait is using unite attacks instead of their standard attacks, which I guess I didn't cover yet, but essentially to reward you for understanding certain relationships, you could do combo attacks with a unit. So based off of a very specific formation relative to the enemy, you either get like a long range attack on a single target, or you get an AoE, or you get a close range blitz that avoids you getting counterattacked and things like that. I thought that element of it was kind of interesting. It's a shame that it was like so ridiculously more powerful than magic. It just kind of dissuaded me from ever really caring about runes, which is not good in a game where all I did was care about runes. So it feels kind of opposite of how things should have been. This game very much rewarded high defense, high attack. Magic was just kind of You could do a lot of what magic could already do by using an item called beads to change the terrain. So in some sense, it's kind of nice that you can give people the ability to fix the terrain if it's bad. But I don't know, chat. I was not feeling it from that particular set of things. I'll mention it since I'm now listening to it a bit more. I think the soundtrack was okay. I know a lot of people, or not a lot of people, a few people had mentioned before they like the Suikoden 4 soundtrack. This game has a lot of the same songs and remakes. I wasn't a fan of some of the remakes that I heard. I honestly just like the original source better for almost all of them. Like, this one's okay. I hear like the little motifs from like the first game. I feel like the songs in 1 and 2 were probably more iconic to me overall. I think 3, for example, had a really strong intro and had some decent town music and stuff like that. 4, to me, was basically just the sea battle theme. Would be the only thing I would consider listening to outside of the game itself. This game's about the same. It's not... I'm not going to call it like an F. It's just like... It's like a C+ for me. For some people, it might be a B+. Might even be an A. It's very much based on musical tastes. But as I said before, I really preferred the original songs a lot more comparatively. So I just found myself going more often than not, oh, I liked it better in 1, or oh, I liked it better in 2. It's kind of unfortunate. So where does that leave us in terms of describing the experiences with the game? One additional thing that absolutely drove me wild, and we had a separate conversation about this during the playthrough, but we're going to bring it back, chat. Dispatch missions. What were they thinking with the dispatch missions? Oh my gosh. Like, this is a concept almost as old as time, honestly, when it comes to video games. The concept of taking a party member and sending them out on a long journey to complete some automated quest. It has existed for many, 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 many years at this point. To see what they did with it drove me wild. The fact that somebody in the chat told me that it's better to just look them up because otherwise you would just be guessing and potentially be wasting your time are not words I want to hear about a video game ever in any description at any factor. It's just like, how should you do a dispatch mission, right? Let's talk about how other games do it, right? Even in things like not related to strategy RPGs in the turn-based sense necessarily, but things like SOCOM or I just like there's so many. I almost can't even name them. Like Final Fantasy Tactics is another great example because it's older than this game. But usually when you're given a mission, you're given a brief description. Tactics has that. Great. It'll tell you how much you'll earn from it and how long it'll take. Great, it needs to do that. That makes sense. Tactics has it. Tactics makes you pay money to do the quests. And you're like, excuse me? Ooh, that's not good. Normally these are free. Not all the time. It's not completely unheard of, but okay. Kind of a weird misstep, but you know, whatever. Maybe it's not too bad. So then we scroll a little further down and it's like, oh, you just have to do this and they'll be gone for 10 days. You're like, okay. So the first thing that you should probably ask yourself is, so how do you determine your chance of success? Tactics says, fool, we're not going to tell you anything. I hope you picked up on lore and or figured out how to translate all of our statements into some numerical factor that we will not explain. Good luck with that. Oh, you don't have Magic 10 or Speed 10 for this quest? GG. Oh, you're catching mice and you don't have a cat character? Oh, GG. Or are you looking to get into combat? Well, your attack stat isn't at least 110, so it's not good enough. GG. Oh, you don't have enough hit points for this other thing. GG. So, how should it have been done in order to not be a massive time waste reset sinkhole? Well, chat, other games have figured this out prior to this game. They figured it out since this game. They figured it out during the year of this game. And that is telling you things like probability of success, right? Games like the Tactics, including the spin-offs, tell you they have a recommended. Like, oh, it's recommended you bring a knight, or somebody that knows magic, or somebody that is this skill. And you're like, okay, I got this, so I've got a reasonable chance of success. And if it fails, I can retry the quest. It's not like a huge deal. Or I'll just come back later when I level up. But usually in those kinds of games, it informs you before you send them chance of success, right? It might be low probability, medium, high. It might have additional mechanics with it, like risk. So sometimes sending people out can kill the character, depending on how brutal the game is. Like, there's a lot of things in there. Right. It doesn't say like exactly. Sometimes if it just gave even just like recommended stats or recommended minimum level, and you could kind of go from there and maybe take a gamble, just something you could go off of other than purely trying to ascribe whatever the text is to a specific stat value. Because again, you might think you have enough speed, but oh no, it wants a speed of like a level 15 character. I don't know how you would tell necessarily, other than you just feel that it does this. And the weird part about it too, chat, about the whole thing with it too, is that like when you do this, there wasn't a single dispatch quest I could pass when I could first take them. Not a single quest. That is bonkers. That is like, my mind was blown. I'm like, what do you mean? They can't even pass any quests that you get at the beginning of the game? I'm in chapter 4. Hello? What? Why even offer me these things if it's not even possible for me to succeed? It's just like, to me, it was very stunning. I'll put it that way. It's very stunning. I felt very offended and very annoyed by it. Baby's first Tactics game and it's garbage. I think there are potentially some good elements in here, but they needed to refine it. Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's one of those games that you really have to kind of data mine, and if you don't play with data mine stuff, you are just not going to do well the first time through. I'm not saying you can't beat it. By all means, like, we were clearing it, just not clearing it well. It's like, you could beat the game. I don't think that's in question. I'm not going to say this, like, even among the hardest games that we've played this year, let alone this month. I'm not even going to make that claim. I just feel like it's unfair if you want to enjoy the game to its extent, how much you have to, like, pry it out with the crowbar. There are games I'm willing to do that for if every other thing works with it well. We've done that with Etrian, where some of the skill descriptions are kind of not correct kind of things. But the overall experience is fun. You know, traveling through the dungeons is fun, going through mapping things is fun, doing those kinds of things is fun. I did not have fun with, like, any component of the game. I feel like, you know, optional side quests failed. Main missions failed. Menuing failed. I almost forgot my favorite menu option where I was like, but why? There's an option to go to the campfire. When you go to the campfire from the, I think it's the caravan menu. Again, there's a lot of weird menus. So from the caravan menu, you could go to the campfire where you could see cutscenes where characters can interact with each other. And for people that have played things like Fire Emblem or other things, you're like, oh, those are just support skill conversation stuff. And I'm like, I know, right? That's what it should be, right? And it kind of is. So between chapters, you'll get additional dialogue between the characters. However, for some reason, you can go there even if you don't have any cutscenes relevant, and it doesn't tell you that there's no cutscenes pending. So there's just this awkward cutscene of the protagonist walking up to the fire, sitting down. He goes ... fade to black. Why? Why did they even add that in the game? Like, here's where, like, just like, if they just had somebody just fix the UI, how much better or more intuitive it would have been. Here's like just the I thought of it 30 seconds ago fix. Why don't you just gray out the option if there's no more cutscenes to view? Whoa. or label it with the star if you got pending new cutscenes you haven't seen before. Whoa! Like, this isn't like rocket science, chat. Like, these are just like really basic things that are big quality of life changes so that you're not just wasting your time watching this idiot bumble down to the campfire and do nothing and say nothing and then fade to black. It's just like, it's just crazy to me. It's crazy to me. I don't want to say the game doesn't feel finished. It just doesn't feel... It just doesn't feel like it's gone through what I would consider, in a more technical terms, user acceptance testing. Like, yes, everything technically functions, and yes, I did not encounter any glitches or bugs, but it is not up to par with what would be considered a production release, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's like the polish in this sense would be just on UI. Just UI and just the game feel. They don't even have to play with the levels of the characters or the stats or the names. They probably could have tweaked the story. But it's just like, it really needed just something to just make it a little better. Where it would have gone from like what I would rate as a below... So let me be clear. I would rate it as below average. I don't hate the game. I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I just feel like it failed to hit the mark. There's a lot of potential in it for people that are willing to put up with that level of BS. Maybe there's some like diamond in the rough in there somewhere. I didn't find it in like 8 hours, 9 hours of gameplay. I didn't find it. So I don't know, maybe other people do. I did not. Everything works, it doesn't feel good. Yeah, I think Murphy describes it as well. Yeah, so it's like exactly what Murphy was saying. So when I went to start the stream, I'm like, I don't really want to sit through like slightly below average story when I know I'm not going to continue with the game, when we could just be playing something better. I mean, it just comes down to that. Like, I do not have the talent or capability of making it an entertaining playthrough, right? I haven't stumbled upon it like a savant that has discovered how to speedrun the game. The game did not click with me. I could barely click through some of the menus because of weird placements of things and trying to figure out where I could view skills and equip skills or equip items, or figuring out how to swap items between characters, and then it needed me to just like cancel out and then switch equipment instead of just having like an equipment menu where I could just rotate quickly through and then swap things. It's just missing that little extra bit. So that's kind of where I'm at with it in terms of overall expectations. Chat, by all means, put your thoughts and feelings if you watch gameplay of the game or if you played the game before. This is your chance on stream to talk about it. I'm gonna double back in my thoughts to see if I missed anything, but I think I covered a lot of the topics that I wanted to talk about with it. Oh, actually, one small thing. So I went to the different shops, and I'm gonna let you know, the shops sucked. This was one of the games where I felt so unimpressed with what the shops were offering. In a game all about upgrading the character and improving, I was like, damn, that sucks. All I thought about when I was buying equipment or choosing not to buy in many scenarios was, wow, this defense to money ratio is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I'm paying like 3,000 gold or maybe 4,000 gold, which I barely got from completing a mission. And all I'm getting is 3 defense points in a game where I already have 40. I'm like, yeah, okay. Oh, man. So I did touch about it, I think, in the middle, but I do want to stress this point. I think what exacerbated a lot of the issues where none of these things are necessarily game ending per se by themselves, or even necessarily in number. I think if you brew all of the issues I just described with the idea that there's permadeath in the game, killed all the fun for me. It killed all the fun almost instantly. Like, I could get away with BS nonsense spawns killing a character if it's not ranked and there's no permadeath. I'd just be like, okay, whatever, I beat the mission and continue. But like, it feels like when I go through that, it's like, haha, I'm potentially just gonna randomly kill your character because I'm gonna introduce a monster ability you haven't seen before, And I'm also going to do it from a character that just spawned in that you didn't know what happened, and they'll just happen to crit, and they'll just happen to be on the right elemental terrain because they'll just happen to go in the right order because one of the RNG elementals that puts down random floor tile changers happens to be the right element of the super monster that just came in, and they just happen to go before your other character, and they just happen to come in from your backside, and they just happen to deal massive damage and kill you. And then it's like, gotcha. Ridiculous. I'm reading what the chat is saying. The game definitely felt clunky and it didn't belong on a PS2 graphically. We talked about that a little bit. The team clearly didn't have experience with making a tactical game. They did the research and playtesting enough to endure it was fun. That's where I find it so confusing. This is not like a genre with like a lack of things to turn to. Like maybe from a development standpoint, they'd never done it before. I think Chad had mentioned before the last game they really did was Vandal Hearts. I think I own Vandal Hearts. I've never played Vandal Hearts. I'm scared to ever play Vandal Hearts after this game. I'm really scared to see what it is. I'm like, I think I'll pass. It's from the same company. I'm like, I don't know. There's a decent game concept here. It just lacks the polish needed to actually be fun. Right, I know. Like, it's like some of these ideas are really neat on their own, but it's just not right. They're just like not quite right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure almost everybody in chat was memeing on the ambush encounters. Everybody was like, when everybody saw that chest in the middle of the map, they're like, yeah. And then they saw another chest, they're like, yeah. And then I went halfway into a map and they're like, yeah. And then I reached the boss and they're like, yeah. There's no surprise. the completely expected ambush party. I guess we'll just call them delayed reinforcements. And at some points we just became kind of bitter about it because it's just like, of course they're just gonna randomly have ambush units that are like 40 or 50% of the total units for no reason. That's what makes things fun and difficult, right? It's just not being given all the information needed to make the right decisions. That's fun. Really doesn't help that there is still a no patches era on PS3, PS4 era, or PC where it'd be patched would be a whole different thing. Yeah, I would be kind of curious how this game would work if they were to do this again. I wouldn't want to play it necessarily. Yeah, oh, thank you. I can't believe I forgot. I said it once, but I didn't go into detail. So, yeah, I talked about the gall of specifically Rene listed in Chris's comment there about giving characters the level 1. So we talked about that really stupid escort mission where the character was level 1 and they can't really defend themselves and they die instantly and there's ambush encounters. We didn't talk about Rita. So Rita is like one of the first characters you could potentially get, I think, in Chapter 4. Don't quote me, I'm not looking it up, I don't care what chapter it was ultimately. But when you get this character, at the time your party's like maybe level 3, maybe level 4, your best character might even be level 5. She comes in at level 1. That mines mission. Every single enemy could kill her in one hit. And that's after we gave her upgrades. So it's not like we just left her in with base stuff. Like she was missing gloves, we gave her gloves. She's wearing leather armor, that's the best we could have bought in the store. The only thing we did not give her was an optional ranking-based item, which again, we've already talked about my thoughts and feelings about that as a mechanic. So it's like, she still died literally in one hit, and they weren't even on the terrain that would buff their damage. She just straight up died. Oh no, this is the Caves music. Oh no, I'm gonna have like PTSD on this song. The song is called Searching for a Clue. Well, I'd hope they get a clue and figure out that people don't want to level this like stupid level 1 character who for some reason in this game, despite being like used almost predominantly as a mage in Suikoden 4, can't equip the lightning rune for damage even though that's literally how we played her in Suikoden 4. Why? Big question number 1. And then like big question number 2, if you're gonna make a character that squishy with that low health and that low potential defense, what did you want to give them a ranged option so you could actually level them? Like we really struggled to level that character. Ultimately we did do it. It required, I think, maybe a reset, maybe 2 resets. We reset at least once in the mines for sure to try to level her, and also because she died. Big eye roll. But from that perspective, it's just like, it reminds me of those kinds of things where there's supposed to be like that character that you kind of struggle to level and will really shine, right? Like they have those even if games of the era, like the first US release Fire Emblem came out before this game, where there's like the concept of like the Pegasus Knight, or the frail unit that's supposed to become like super good, and there's something like phenomenal about them that'll blow you out of the water. Not even 2 battles later, completely outclassed. Completely outclassed. Like, and they don't even come in at level 1. They came in at level 6, I think, level 5, 6, and I think 1 level 7. Or maybe just because they leveled in that battle. They could have also been level 6. But they were like literally 6 times more leveled, or had 5 overall more levels than the previous character that could barely get 2 levels in 2 battles. Maybe if I was trying a bit harder, I could have gotten up to level 4 comfortably. And it's like, why? Do you just not respect the player? Is that why you did this? It's a JRPG, grinding is the only way to win. I mean, that's, I guess what their thought was, that you would just endlessly grind free battle in order to level up all these characters. Oh, there's actually one more mechanic I forgot to touch upon that is kind of annoying. I understand why they did it, but it's more of a mixed bag thing. So we talked a little bit about skills, making the characters more unique, and some of them are more predisposed for things like blocking or magic. You share like a universal experience pool in order to assign the skills, which at the point that we played, I don't think was a big problem. It lets you bring up low-level characters to speed a bit faster, which is okay. But I definitely have concerns about that kind of system in general. I'll put that in the mixed bag category. I'm not going to count it against it per se. I like the idea of some shared experience versus like having individual job point pools like Final Fantasy Tactics, where you just end up with like millions of points potentially at the end of the game and nothing to spend it on because you already got all your best skills. So it's like, it's neat that they're letting you use it for other things, but yeah. It's the only way to make their games last 100 hours instead of 5. Yeah, and that's a thing too, with like the really slow battle animations and the slow, not really skippable dialogue, because it's about as long as it takes for them to speak, and none of them speak particularly quickly. It feels padded even though it's a short game, which is a weird statement. But unfortunately, I think that's just how I feel about it. Yeah, it's kind of like Valkyrie Profile's bonus experience, exactly. I don't mind them having necessarily individual pools and separate pools. But just, I don't agree, not all JRPG has this problem. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm gonna have to agree with Calvisham. If you watch how we played through a lot of the Suikoden games outside of 3, even in its own series, we did very minimal combat. Chat can definitely confirm. I basically speed run the first game. I went to like one area, fought like 5 battles, and then I skipped combat for like 4 hours. Yeah. So it really just depends on it. As I said before, I feel like this was probably going to be a longer deconstruction when we were talking about it originally in the first session. Yeah, I just feel like there's so many things that were like so close to working, but it just wasn't quite there. So is this the worst game we've played on stream even? No. That honor will forever go to probably Castlevania 64. May you never be played again. This stream. Hated that game. But yeah, it's just kind of like one of those things, like when it reminds you of like the clunkiness of the menus, reminds you of your Valkyrie Profile 2s, or it reminds you of just kind of that sinking feeling about item collection, like in Shadow Hearts A New World. You know, I don't want to make those comparisons naturally, but I'm thinking about them when I play a game like this, where they have gone wrong somewhere for me to associate some of the worst things that we've played on stream with them. It just needed some polish. It's just really unfortunate. Of course, if you're replaying your Valkyrie sometimes sufficient power level weren't sufficient, just the rest of the story. You mean with optimal player with buster spells? I think most JRPGs you could skip levels with skills and battles. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Calvisham. Even the really old games, like Final Fantasies, you could get away with basically not leveling at all, and you just go start to finish. The only time where, like, it would not be as feasible is if there's, like, a more obscure item use in order to do something against a very specific enemy. I would consider that kind of more in the speedrun territory versus how we play. But then look at how, like, we play something like a Radiant Historia, where Chad has seen me literally skip entire battlefields worth of combat and just go in for the bosses. It really just depends on how much it leans on the player for skill versus raw stat-based numbers. Like, you can't really skip combat in something like an East 1 or an East 2 or an East Origin. It's just not... It would just get into the realm of impossibility with how little damage you would be able to do, because so much of what you could do is tied into your stats. So there's always going to be, like, those kinds of exceptions, and unfortunately this game, it at least seemed to let you level fairly quickly, but we didn't really get into a point where we could say, like, oh, if we were at the end of the game, how easy was it to level some of these low-level characters? We didn't really get into that level of experience to say definitively one way or another. But I don't know, chat. This game is just not for me. Maybe it's for some of you. I personally do not want to continue with the game. So I think we'll leave it here. So chat, I'll give you another minute or so to give your final thoughts. I'm going to rehydrate and potentially end our final thoughts, unless I think of something. Yeah, I don't think I have really too much else to add. I think we touched upon most of the basics. I think we gave a general consensus of how we felt about the game overall. I do want to say, though, this game does inspire me to play other strategy-based games to show how they should have done things with some menus. So maybe we'll see things like Disgaea, for example, in the future, once we're done with Suikoden. That's what it inspired me to do. It inspired me to play stronger strategy-based games where, yes, your characters can die, and yes, there's a sense of challenge, but there's ways to avoid the challenge if you want to grind or superpower level and stuff like that. We're not going to do the superpower leveling, of course. We're going to try to just go through and see what we got. But from this perspective, I don't really want to continue with these particular set of characters. That's it. Play more sad music soundtrack. You did it. But yeah, I think we're at the end here, chat. I can't think of too much else to say other than just, oh, I will laugh though. One final thought. Going from the protagonist as a kid to an adult was so funny how nerfed he got as an adult. He could originally use up to like 3rd level slots. Oh, actually, that's something I forgot to touch upon briefly. So there are combat runes in this game. So what I mean by that is instead of using your spell slots for spells, you can use them for combat skills. And the protagonist initially starts out with one that lets him kind of attack at a distance. It kind of reminds me of like what would be Hurricane Slash in Disgaea, where it hits a couple spaces in front of you with the sword technique. But from that standpoint, it just kind of takes that away from you. So I think it also makes sense why I started to have less fun with the game. Because the characters that were just so bonkers that didn't need unite attacks or necessarily need runes of magic were just taken away from you because they're just bemoaning themselves. Which I guess leads into our true final point that I can think of. I thought it was really funny that the characters were acting like some of the events happened just yesterday, and it was like 3 years later, and I'm like, were they just that trauma charged that they're still that affected 3 years late? Like 3 years later? I don't know, chat. It felt kind of weird. The whole supportive mage basically just being a complete servant was just kind of awkward and weird. I'm not gonna lie, chat. It was just like, geez, they took that super not well. Kiri really fell apart during those 3 years and no one for any kind of therapy or coping skills. I guess so. Yeah, I love that because as part of that same thing, they're like, oh my gosh, it's a rune cannon. I never expected that, or some equivalency thereof. And I'm like, isn't that your whole life purpose? Isn't that what you've been thinking about for 3 years? And then you finally see a rune cannon, and then the first thing you do is run away. How ridiculously dumb. Oh, Suikoden tactics. Yon existed, but why? We'll never know. She could be like some weird tree spawn thing from the other world. Who knows? Listen, chat, I'm not gonna figure out. You know what? We'll just pretend she's Yggdrasil, and we'll go close enough. You know what, chat? She's Yggdrasil and or a giant dragon. That JRPG tells me one of those two statements is true. Right, chat? It has to be true. JRPGs wouldn't lie to us. Well, anyway, chat, we are now officially at the end for this particular section. So, sorry to say this one ended on kind of a downer. It wasn't as extreme, I would say, of a disappointment or letdown as some of the other games we played, but don't be surprised if we talk about this towards the end. She was the face tower all along, you're right, Chad. Or Suddenly Centaur. Which I guess we did get Suddenly Centaured this game. The random horse unit decided to go like 10 tiles and just bonk us. We did get Suddenly Centaured. But anyway, chat, we're gonna leave it here. So if you got to this point in the video, I'd just like to thank you for watching. And we're gonna say goodbye to YouTube, chat. So give you a couple seconds because I know there's a stream delay. I didn't give you the normal cue, but we're gonna say goodbye to YouTube. So thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next series.